The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on Revolution Radio, on the #1 listener-supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for free. They're free. That's $0. No money at all. You just log in and there you go. You've got access to all the host shows and you can download them in MP3 format. It's fantastic. But not only can you do that at the station's website, which is revolution.radio, you can also get yourself some great merchandise. You can get a t-shirt, a mug, anything like that. All the artwork is done by one of the lovely hosts here. His name is Amad Painter. Does a great job. His artwork's really good. I was floored by how good it is. So well done, Amad. And look, if you can't donate, do tell someone else about the station. Tell someone else about it, because the more people that know, the more likelihood someone can donate towards the station. And that's really important to keep it running. It isn't free. It's not free at all to run the station. It takes a lot of money per month to do it. There are a whole bunch of virtual servers out there that require subscriptions and things like that. So, do try and help. Anyway, thanks for listening to Revolution Radio. I just have to ask that. Now, oh, by the way, there's a chat room. You can talk to us while we're on air. And that's really cool. And this is show number 640. Mecky would normally say, if he weren't muted, he would say 40 and 600. I don't know where Mecky is. Maybe he's not back yet. Maybe he's having a break. But anyway, we'll see what happens. And now we're actually talking about the parasitic system. And if you don't know what that is, I'll elaborate. It's fiat currency and fractional reserve lending. And this is part 8 in the series. And we are at page 48 of 68 pages of show notes that all help you understand what we're talking about. Because, let me see if I am right. Yes, I am. 640. Now I'm going to continue talking about where we're at. And this is, whoa, it's very long here. Let me see. Talk about John Kenneth Galbraith. The American economy has been based on government debt since 1864, and it is locked into this system. Talk of paying off the debt without first reforming the banking system is just talk and a complete impossibility. That same year, Lincoln had a pleasant surprise. Turns out the Tsar of Russia, Alexander II, was well aware of the money changers' scam. The Tsar was refusing to allow them to set up a central bank in Russia. If Lincoln could limit the power of the money changers and win the war, the bankers would not be able to split America and hand it back to Britain and France as planned. The Tsar knew that this handing back would come at a cost, which would eventually need to be paid back by attacking Russia. It being clearly in the money changers' sights. The Tsar declared that if France or Britain gave help to the South, Russia would consider this an act of war. Britain and France would instead wait in vain to have the wealth of the colonies returned to them, And while they waited, Lincoln won the Civil War. With an election coming up the next year, Lincoln himself would wait for renewed public support before reversing the National Bank Act he had been pressured into approving during the war. Lincoln's opposition to the central bank's financial control and a proposed return to the gold standard is well documented. He would certainly have killed off the national bank's monopoly. Had he not been killed off himself only 41 days after being re-elected, the money changers were pressing for a gold standard because gold was scarce and easy to have a monopoly over. Much of this was already waiting in their hands, and each gold merchant was well aware that what they really had could be easily made to seem like much, much more. Silver would only widen the field and lower the share. So they pressed for, Mekki. They pressed for, we're on page 48, the return of the gold standard. And it's you.
47.
48?
There we go. The return of the gold standard.
Correct.
1866 to 1881.
Ah.
Now, this is a quote from W. Cleon Skousen. Right after the Civil War, there was considerable talk about reviving Lincoln's brief experiment with the constitutional monetary system. Had not the European Money Trust intervened, it would have no doubt become an established institution. Again, European bankers meddling in American affairs. Even after his death, the idea that America might print its own debt-free money set off warning bells throughout the entire European banking community. And the critical thing is debt-free money, right? On April 12th, in 1866, the American Congress passed the Contraction Act, allowing the Treasury to call in and retire some of Lincoln's greenbacks. With only the banks standing to gain from this, it's not hard to work out the source of this action. To give the American public the false impression that they would be better off under the gold standard, the money changers used the control they had to cause economic instability and panic the people. This was fairly easy to do by calling in existing loans and refusing to issue new ones. A tried and proven method of causing depression. Not depression in people, but the depression. They would then spread the word through the media they largely controlled that the lack of a single gold standard was the cause of the hardship which ensued, while all this time using the Contraction Act to lower the amount of money in circulation. It went from $1.8 billion in circulation in 1866, allowing $50.46 per person, to $1.3 billion in 1867, allowing $44 per person, to $0.6 billion in 1876, making only $14.60 per person, and down to $0.4 billion only 10 years later, leaving only $6.67 per person.
Good grief.
I know, and the continually growing population. Most people believe the economists when they tell us that recessions and depressions are part of the natural flow. But in truth, the money supply is controlled by a small minority who have always done so and will continue to do so if we let them. By 1872, the American public was beginning to feel the squeeze, so the Bank of England, scheming in the back rooms, sent Ernest Sate with lots of money to bribe Congress into demonetizing silver. Ernest drafted the legislation himself, which came into law with the passing of the Coinage Act, effectively stopping the minting of silver that year. Here's what he said about his trip, obviously pleased with himself. I went to America in the winter of 1872 to 1873, authorized to secure, if I could, the passage of a bill demonetizing silver. It was in the interests of those I represented, I should say, the governors of the Bank of England, to have it done. By 1873, gold coins were the only form of coin money. Ernest Said Orr, as explained by Senator Daniel of Virginia. In 1872, silver being demonetized in Germany, England, and Holland, a capital of 100,000 pounds, about $500,000, was raised. Ernest Said was sent to this country with this fund as agent for foreign bondholders to effect the same object, which of course was the demonetization of silver. Within 3 years, with 30% of the workforce unemployed, 30%, the American people began to harken back to the days of silver-backed money and the greenbacks. The U.S. Silver Commission was set up to study the problem and responded with telling history this. The disaster of the Dark Ages was caused by decreasing money and falling prices. Without money, civilization could not have had a beginning, and with a diminishing supply, it must languish, and unless relieved, finally perish. At the Christian era, the metallic money of the Roman Empire amounted to 1,800 million, so 1.8 billion. By the end of the 15th century, it had shrunk to less than $200 million. History records no other such disastrous transition as that from the Roman Empire to the Dark Ages. All right. All of a sudden, history makes sense. United States Silver Commission, while they obviously could see the problems, right, being caused by the restricted money supply, this declaration did little to help the problem, and in 1877, riots broke out all over the country. The bank's response was to do nothing except to campaign against the idea that greenbacks should be reissued. The American Bankers Association Secretary James Buell expressed the bankers' attitude well in a letter to fellow members of the association. He wrote this: "It is advisable to do all in your power to sustain such prominent daily and weekly newspapers, especially the agricultural and religious press, as will oppose the greenback issue of paper money, and that you will also withhold patronage from all applicants who are not willing to oppose the government issue of money. To repeal the act creating banknotes or to restore to circulation the government issue of money will be to provide the people with money and will therefore seriously affect our individual profits as bankers and lenders."
You can't make money. We are the ones that make money.
You say this flippantly, but it's exactly the attitude they have.
Mm-hmm.
I want to quickly just say this, and then I will continue with the text. There was a banking commission in Australia, a Royal Banking Commission, right? And this was a broadcast interview on TV. And this was, I think, the CEO of, I can't remember which bank, it could be Commonwealth, it doesn't matter. I think it was Commonwealth Bank, doesn't matter. And he was asked a few questions. And the way, so he stormed out of the interview, essentially. And the way he reacted was like, who are you little mud people asking me questions? I mean, I barely acknowledge your humanity, if that.
Your existence. Yeah.
And here you are breathing the same rarefied air as I, and you pound me with these questions. I mean, he didn't say any of it, but that's exactly the expression he had on his face.
Yeah.
And he was just like, impatient, and he couldn't believe that anybody would dare to question.
Ask, yes.
And I mean, astounding. But James Buell goes on to say, "See your congressman at once and engage him to support our interest that we may control legislation." What this statement exposes is the difference in mentality between your average person and a banker. With a banker, less really is more, and every need and opportunity to exploit. James Garfield became president in 1881 with a firm grasp of where the problem lay. This is what President James Garfield said. "Whosoever controls the volume of money in any country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled, one way or another, by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originate. Now, there's a kicker to this. Within weeks of releasing this statement, President Garfield was assassinated, Dave.
Wow, I'm reeling. The story is so powerful, Becky. Free silver! And that's not the horse. 1891 to 1912. Those dates should ring around. Resonating with you. Fleecing of the flock is the term the money changers use for the process of booms and depressions, which make it possible for them to repossess property at a fraction of its worth. In 1891, a major fleece was being planned. I feel like the narrator of a play. This is a quote. This is a quote by the American Bankers Association, as printed in the Congressional Record of April 29th, 1913. On September 1st, 1894, we will not renew our loans under any consideration. On September 1st, we will demand our money. We will foreclose and become mortgagees in possession. We can take 2/3 of the farms west of the Mississippi and thousands of them east of the Mississippi as well at our price. Then the farmers will become tenants, as in England. The continued gold standard made this possible. William Jennings Bryan was the Democratic candidate for president in 1896, campaigning to bring silver back as the money standard. Free silver. He says, "We will answer demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labour this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." Of course, the money changers supported his opposition to the Republican side, so long as he wanted the gold standard maintained. The factory bosses were somehow convinced to tell their workforce that the business would close down if Bryan was elected, and everyone would lose their jobs. The Republicans won by a small margin. Bryan tried again in 1900 and in 1908, but lost both times. He became Secretary of State under Wilson in 1912, but became disenchanted and resigned 3 years later in 1915 under suspicious circumstances connected with the sinking of the Lusitania, which drove America into the First World War. False flag.
Well, I mean, if he was a moral man, let's say, and I think by now anybody that has an inkling of history and the forces moving behind it would agree that false flags are a common tool of the parasites.
Oh, yeah.
To goad people into the actions they want to, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot more research we can put into this and flesh it out. But now we're coming to J.P. Morgan and the crash of 1907. Can I just say here, excuse me, how else do we know J.P. Morgan? What else has made J.P. Morgan famous? Anyone? J.P. Morgan was the chief financial backer for Tesla, Nikola Tesla. And as soon as J.P. Morgan realized that Tesla's invention wouldn't make him any money, he pulled all his funding.
He bailed, yeah.
What? The same J.P. Morgan? Yeah, the same.
Yep, the
J.P.
same.
Morgan.
Yep.
The cause of the crash of 1907. People will do strange things when in a panic. And this might explain why Morgan was authorized to print $200 million from nothing. which he then used to prop things up. Some of the troubled banks with less than 1% in reserve had no choice. It was accept the solution or go under. Even if they had worked out that their problems had been caused by the same people now offering the solution, there's not a lot they could have done about it. And, sorry, before I go on, this is exactly what happened in 2008. It's exactly what happened in 2008. We bailed the banks out because, yes, they caused the problem, but so what?
Oh, they weren't at fault, Mickey. You see, don't worry about that.
That's the thing.
Mhm.
It does actually make me angry in ways you can't imagine.
J.P.
Morgan, of course, was hailed a hero. This is what Woodrow Wilson said. The same Woodrow Wilson who decided the League of Nations is not for America. Anyway, all this trouble could be averted if we appointed a committee of 6 or 7 men like J.P. Morgan to handle the affairs of our country. Yes, that's a good idea.
Mhm.
However, not everybody was fooled. And this is coming from Charles A. Lindbergh, a Republican representative from Minnesota. And so he was obviously, Lindbergh, the same Lindbergh that is the famous flyer man. This is what he said. Those not favorable to the money trust could be squeezed out of business, and the people frightened into demanding changes in the banking and currency laws, which the money trust would frame. Apart from making a small number rich at the expense of the many, which is always the case, by the way, in this case, the instability also served the second purpose of encouraging the public to believe that they would be better off living under a central bank and the gold standard. Desperate people have little time for logic. Dave.
Oh, that's so true. Lincoln watches. I haven't bought one of those yet. Mickey, I know you're a watch person.
Nice.
In Washington, the statue of Lincoln sitting in his chair is facing a building called the Federal Reserve Headquarters. This institution would not be there if Lincoln's monetary policy had been adopted by the USA. Wow, I never knew that. That's crazy. So it's not the federal. It is not federal, and it has doubtful reserves. The name is an open deception designed to give this private bank the appearance that it is operating in the public's interest, when in fact it is run solely to gain private profit for its select stockholders. It came into being as the result of one of the slickest moves in financial history. On the 23rd of December 1913, the House of Representatives had passed, is it passed? P-A-S-S-E-D probably? The Federal Reserve Act. But it was still having difficulty getting it out of the Senate. Most members of Congress had gone home for the holidays, but unfortunately the Senate had not adjourned. It said sen die, without day. And so we're technically still in session. There were only 3 members still present. On a unanimous consent vote in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. No objection was made, possibly because there was no one there to object. Charles Lindbergh would have objected. The Lindbergh says, as a quote, "The financial system has been turned over to the Federal Reserve Board. That board administers the finance system by authority of a purely profiteering group. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money."
Before you go on, this tactic of introducing legislation either at the last second, in the middle of the night, or when nobody's there, has been used.
We've done it here,
extensively. I mean, I think the Patriot Act, 1 and 2, came through like that. But also Similar legislation here in Australia was passed in that fashion.
I remember seeing that show that we watched, Maggie, with the parliamentarians in the room voting. Okay, ring the bell. So that's something that I don't like the way they behave in Parliament, to be honest. It's like school children. It's awful. But anyway, and that's obviously what we have, and I'm not going to change that anytime soon. Now, Louis T. McFadden would have objected and says, "We have in this country one of the most corrupt institutions the world has ever known. I refer to the Federal Reserve Board. This evil institution has impoverished the people of the United States and has practically bankrupted our government. It has done this through the corrupt practice of the moneyed vultures who control it." That is, thank you very much.
Some strong words, you think?
Yeah, it didn't hold
back.
Tell
us what you really think. What?
Barry Goldwater would have also objected. "Most Americans," he says, "have no real understanding of the operation of the international moneylenders. The accounts of the Federal Reserve System have never been audited. It operates outside the control of Congress and manipulates the credit of the United States." Senator Barry Goldwater from Arizona. Most Americans would object if they knew. The Federal Reserve is the largest single creditor of the United States government, and they also are also the people who decide how much the average person's car payments are going to be, what their house payments are going to be, and whether they have a job or not. The three people who passed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913 knew exactly what they were doing when they set up this private bank, modelled on the Bank of England, and the fact that the Bank of England had been operating independently, unopposed, since 1694 must have given them a great deal of confidence.
Just think about that for a second. I mean, we're talking hundreds of years of corruption and parasitic molestation of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I love my rhymes. where there's war, there is money. War uses up more materials more quickly than most anything else on earth, which is the truth. Just look at Gaza, or Ukraine for that matter. In war, expensive equipment doesn't wear out slowly. It gets blown up. It's interesting to note that during the 119-year period from the founding of the Bank of England to Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo, England had been at war for 56 years, while the rest of the time preparing for it. In the process, the money changers had been getting rich. So 56 years of wars and another 60-odd years of preparing for war. That's what we do. What do you do? War! When do you want to do it? Now! All the time! So there was the newly formed Federal Reserve, poised to produce any money the US government might need from thin air, with each dollar standing to make a healthy interest. 9 days after its formation, the Federal Reserve founders were wishing each other a Happy New Year. What good fortune might 1914 bring, Dave?
Oh, I don't know. War? World War
10
I.
points!
Pepsi? So World War I, 1914 to 1918. The Germans borrowed money from the German Rothschilds Bank, the British from the British Rothschilds Bank, and the French from, I don't know, you guessed it, from the French Rothschilds. American superbanker JP Morgan was, amongst other things, also a sales agent for war materials. Surprise. 6 months into the war, his spending of $10 million a day made him the largest consumer on the planet. Well, there's a record for the books, isn't it? Yes. The Rockefellers and the head of the President Wilson's War Industries Board Bernard Baruch each made some $200 million while families contributed their sons to the bloody front lines. But profit was not the only motive for involvement. Russia had spoiled the money changers' plan to split America in two and remained the last major country not to have its own central bank. However, 3 years after the start of the war, the entire Russian royal family was killed and communism began. You might find it strange to learn that the Russian Revolution was also fueled with British money. Capitalist businessmen financing communism? Author Gary Allen gives his explanation. Here's a quote from him. If one understands that socialism is not a share the wealth program, but is in reality a method to consolidate and control the wealth, then the seeming paradox of super rich men promoting socialism becomes no paradox at all. Just get used to it. Instead, it becomes logical, even the perfect tool of power-seeking megalomaniacs. Communism, or more accurately, socialism, is not a movement of the downtrodden masses, but of the economic elite. W. Cleon Skousen wrote in his book, The Naked Capitalist, quote, "Power from any source tends to create an appetite for additional power. It was almost inevitable that the super rich would one day aspire to control not only their own wealth, but the wealth of the world, the whole world. To achieve this, they were perfectly willing to feed the ambitions of the power-hungry political conspirators who were committed to the overthrow of all existing governments and the establishments of a central worldwide dictatorship. Extreme revolutionary groups were controlled by being financed when they complied and cut off with the money sometimes being given to their opposition when they didn't. If you find this hard to believe, listen to what the so-called dictator of the new Soviet Union had to say. This is Vladimir Lenin. The state does not function as we desired. The car does not obey. A man is at the wheel and seems to lead it, but the car does not drive in the desired direction. It moves as another force wishes. The Representative Louis T. McFadden, chairman of the House Banking and Currency Committee throughout the 1920s and 30s, explained it this way. The course of Russian history has, indeed, been greatly affected by the operations of international bankers. The Soviet government has been given United States Treasury funds by the Federal Reserve Board, acting through the Chase Bank. England has drawn money from us through the Federal Reserve banks and has relent it at high rates of interest to the Soviet government. Good Lord, what word is that?
Dnieperstory.
Thank you. That dam was built with funds unlawfully taken from the United States Treasury by the corrupt and dishonest Federal Reserve Board and the Federal Reserve banks. Even, this is McFadden again, even when communism collapsed in the Soviet Union, Boris Yeltsin revealed that most of the foreign aid was ending up, we quote, straight back into the coffers of Western banks in debt service.
See, we like to think, and this is really important before we talk about world domination here, we like to think that when communism came into Russia and China, all the bourgeoisie and all wealth was equally and rightfully distributed to all the people. No, that's not what happened at all. What happened was that millions of Russians as well as Chinese died as a result of the consequences of this revolution by forced resettlements and forced labor, I guess the elimination of potential adversaries or counter-revolutionaries. But the thing is this, you still need money.
Mm-hmm.
Because nothing in our world, unfortunately, it works unless you have money, right? You have to, if you can't make weapons, you have to buy weapons. But even if you make weapons, you have to buy raw materials, right? You have to pay people for that. You have to feed people. If you don't make enough food, you have to buy the food. So there was always a need for money. Now, the banks don't care at all what the political system is that you're under. Not even in the slightest. In fact, anarchy would be great. That's fine, not a problem at all. As long as you keep borrowing money and make sure you keep paying us back with interest. These are the only things that the bank worries about.
Hey, Mickey,
human rights.
All I'm going to say, every time there's a revolution, sales of gold toilets go up.
Yes, sir. That is unfortunately the truth. I like myself a gold toilet.
That's right.
It is obscene, and yet that's exactly where we are. And then people say, "Oh, it's a comedy drama, Mickey. It's a comedy drama." Okay, Russian Revolution is a comedy drama. Okay, the Great Depression, comedy drama. World domination. With Russia down, the money changers now had control of every major national economy, like a steamroller moving and a wolf gathering its pack. There was only one thing left to do, and that was to go global. The first attempt was the proposal at the Paris Peace Conference after World War I to set up the League of Nations. Old habits die hard, and even what they called the war to end all wars was not enough to convince nations to resolve their boundaries. The League died. There are many reasons the League died, and least of which was not that Woodrow Wilson would not become part of it with America. So that was anyway. If politicians really were being controlled, you would think at least one would break ranks and cry out against it. And he did. One was no less than former New York City Mayor John Halen, and this is what he said. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of the newspapers and magazines in this country. They use the columns of these papers to club into submission or drive out of office public officials who refuse to do the bidding of the powerful, corrupt cliques which compose the invisible government. The warning of Theodore Roosevelt has much timeless today. For the real menace of our republic in America, is this invisible government, which like a giant octopus sprawls its slimy length over city, state, and nation. It seizes in its long and powerful tentacles our executive offices, our legislative bodies, our schools, our courts, our newspapers, and every agency created for the public protection. To depart from mere generalizations, let me say, this is the author, that at the head of this octopus are the Rockefeller Standard Oil interest and a small group of powerful banking houses, generally referred to as the international bankers. The little coterie of powerful international bankers virtually run the United States government for their own selfish purposes. They practically control both parties, write political platforms, make cat's paws of party leaders, using the leading men of private organizations, and resort to every device to place a nomination for higher public office only such candidates as will be amenable to the dictates of corrupt big business. These international bankers and Rockefeller Standard Oil interests control the majority of newspapers and magazines in this country. These warnings fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the music and excitement of the roaring 20s. People don't tend to complain much in times of prosperity, so the money changers used this boom time they had created to diffuse any complaints about their growing control.
Yeah. That's absolutely true. Oh, it brings us to the sad time, the Depression in 1929. All of the Wall Street giants, J.P. Morgan, Joe F. Kennedy, J.D. Rockefeller, Bernard Baruch, got out of the stock market and put their assets in gold just before the crash. With control of the press and the education system, few Americans are aware that the Fed caused the Depression. It is, however, a well-known fact among leading top economists. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize-winning economist, says the Federal Reserve definitely caused the Great Depression by contracting the amount of currency in circulation by 1/3 from 1929 to 1933. Representative Louis T. McFadden, Pennsylvania, says it was not accidental. It was a carefully contrived occurrence. The international bankers sought to bring about a condition of despair here so that they might emerge as rulers of all of us. He also says, I think it can hardly be disputed that the statesmen and financiers of Europe are ready to take almost any means to reacquire rapidly the gold stock which Europe lost to America as the result of World War I. $40 billion somehow vanished in the crash. It didn't really vanish. It simply shifted into the hands of the money changers. This is how Joe Kennedy went from having $4 million in 1929 to having over $100 million in 1935. Wow, I'd love that kind of money, Mickey. $4 million. The starting amount, $4 million. During this time, the Fed caused 33% reduction of the money supply, causing deeper depression.
Yes, sir. And again, not for the people. Now, how the Fed creates money. We've been talking about how the privately owned Federal Reserve can produce money from thin air. Here's how it's done. The purchase of bonds is approved by the Federal Open Market Committee. That's actually part of the government. The Fed buys the bonds, which it pays for with electronic credits made to the seller's bank. These credits are based on nothing. The receiving banks then use these credits as reserves from which they can loan out 10 times the amount. Well, that is no longer true. It's as much as you want, really. To reduce the amount of money in the economy, they simply reverse the process. The Fed sells bonds to the public and money is drawn from the purchaser's bank to pay for them. Each million withdrawn lowers the bank's ability to loan by 10 million. The federal bank, in this way, has overall control of the US money supply, as each country's central bank does in the same way. Each country's central bank. The bankers, through the magic of fractional reserve banking, have been delegated the right to create 90% of the money supply. Well, it's a lot worse now. This control makes a mockery of any elected government. It places so-called leaders behind the toy steering wheel like the plastic ones set up to amuse small children. Or, as Republican Charles Lindbergh, father of famous aviator Lucky Lindy, puts it when commenting on the Federal Reserve Act, this act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill. That's some strong tobacco, I'll tell you what. Or, as Woodrow Wilson put it, we have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled governments in the civilized world. No longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by a vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Some of the biggest men in the United States in the field of commerce and manufacture are afraid of something. They know that there's a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. Something similar was said of Hitler, by the way. In order to clearly establish that this is not a conspiracy theory, but is actually how things are controlled, we further quote Charles Lindbergh. From the House of Representatives, Lindbergh was well placed to see exactly what was happening back then and continues to happen today. And this is what he said. To cause high prices, all the Federal Reserve Board will do will be to lower the rediscount rate, produce an expansion of credit and a rising stock market. Then, when businessmen are adjusted to these conditions, it can check prosperity in mid-career by arbitrarily raising the rate of interest. Where have I heard this before? It can cause the pendulum of a rising and falling market to swing gently back and forth by slight changes in the discount rate, or cause violent fluctuations by greater rate variation. And in either case, it will possess inside information as to financial conditions and advanced knowledge of the coming change, either up or down. This is the strangest, most dangerous advantage ever placed in the hands of a special privileged class by any government that ever existed. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. I want to say this again because it beautifully encapsulates exactly where we are. This is the strangest. The system is private, conducted for the sole purpose of obtaining the greatest possible profits from the use of other people's money. They know in advance when to create panics to their advantage. They also know when to stop panicking. Inflation and deflation work equally well for them when they control finance.
Now, this gets us into Adolf's bankers. Most all will be aware of Hitler's rise to power. What they probably don't know is that he was almost completely financed by money drawn from the privately owned American Federal Reserve. Congressman Louis T. McFadden from Pennsylvania, who served only 12 years as chairman of the Committee on Banking and Currency, says, after World War I, Germany fell into the hands of the international bankers. Those bankers bought her and they now own her, lock, stock and barrel. They have purchased her industries. They have mortgages on her soil. They control her production. They control all her utilities. The international German bankers have subsidized the present government of Germany, and they have also supplied every dollar of the money Adolf Hitler has used in his lavish campaign to build up threat to the government of Brüning. When Brüning fails to obey the orders of the German international bankers, Hitler is brought forth to scare the Germans into submission. Through the Federal Reserve Board, over 30 billion of American money has been pumped into Germany. You have all heard of the spending that has taken place in Germany? Modernistic dwellings, her great planetariums, her gymnasiums, her swimming pools, her fine public highways, her perfect factories. All this was done on our money. All this was given to Germany through the Federal Reserve Board. The Federal Reserve Board has pumped so many billions of dollars into Germany that they dare not name the total.
That was prior to the end of World War II and the Marshall Plan, right? This was after World War One, but that's what they do. And this is what the economic hitmen still do and have done since the end of World War II. They bolster systems and politicians that they like, regimes that they like, and they ensure the failure and downfall and death of the systems and candidates they don't like. It's a thing. It's a thing. Fort Knox, I think I'll make it. In 1933, new President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed a bill forcing all the American people to hand over all of their gold at base rates, with the exception of rare coins. He disowned himself from the bill, claiming to not have read it, and his Secretary of the Treasury claimed this was what the experts wanted. It's always comforting when the experts are brought up. Bought at bargain basement price with money produced from nothing by the Federal Reserve, the gold was melted down and stacked in the newly built bullion depository called Fort Knox. Once collected in 1935, the price of gold was raised from $20.66 up to $35 per ounce. But only non-American gold qualified to be sold. This meant those who had avoided the crash by investing in gold they had shipped to London could now nearly double their money while the rest of America starved. What? By the end of World War II, Fort Knox did hold 70% of the world's gold. But over the years, it was sold off to the European money changers, while a public audit of Fort Knox reserves was repeatedly denied. The Germans wanted to see it, right, Dave? No? Nein? You can't see it? Nein? This is what... now, rumors actually did spread about the missing gold. This is what Edith Roosevelt said. Allegations of missing gold from our Fort Knox vaults are being widely discussed in European circles. But what is puzzling is that the administration is not hastening to demonstrate conclusively that there is no cause for concern over our gold treasure, if indeed it is in a position to do so. Finally, in 1981, President Ronald Reagan was convinced to have a look into Fort Knox with a view to reintroducing the gold standard. He appointed a group called the Gold Commission. They found that the U.S. Treasury owned no gold at all. All the Fort Knox gold remaining is now being held as collateral by the Federal Reserve against the national debt, using credits made from nothing. The Fed had robbed the largest treasury of gold on Earth.
Yeah, so this isn't very long, so I'll do this, then we'll finish it up. World War II, 1939 and 1945. World War II saw the US debt increase by 598%. Just consume that for a minute. While Japan's debt went up by a staggering 1,348%, with France up by 583% and Canada up by 417%. With the hot war over, the Cold War began, the arms race causing more and more borrowing. Now the money changers could really concentrate on global domination. Step 1, the European Monetary Union and NAFTA. Step 2, centralize the global economy via the World Bank, the IMF, and the GATT. Now, guess what? The WTO. Wow.
Now, none of this is made up. None of this. None of this. These quotes are real. What happened is real. And the truth is, we probably don't know the half of it.
That's the truth. That we don't know the half of it.
So, and again, nothing has really changed. I go back to what happened in recent history, right? When you have financial crimes of a magnitude, to be honest, too large to even get your head around.
That's right.
Committed by the very institutions that we rely on, right? But I mean the banks. You never trust the banks. You shouldn't. But clearly, the ratings organization, the government, the entire system with its checks and balances, they're all in this. All of them. There's no, okay, anybody who can stand to gain anything from this or from this corruption is in on it. And why wouldn't you be? People would say you're a fool if you don't take advantage of the system this way. But I like to differ. Because the thing is this, right? Ethics is really something that you either have or you don't. And it is doing the right thing when no one is looking. When it might even be to your disadvantage that defines you as a person. Okay.
Well, guess what? Right before the music plays, if the Reserve Bank of Australia would like to sponsor this show, go ahead and make contact with me via whatever method you can feel possible, and we stop talking about you.
Truckloads of cash, truckloads of cash, truckloads of cash.
Stay tuned for another Shiny Side Out next week, and also 7 a.m. breakfast time, Tuesday and Thursday for Plato's Cave. And in the meantime, you're right, Mackie, stay safe.